Question. In Christian-based religions, there's a concept of the conscience as a debate between the devil and the angels sitting on our shoulders. Is that same conscience the voice in our head that questions whether we are doing the right thing? Is it part of the non-duality mindset? And is this linked to the idea of it says here the ion presence, but I assume it means it should be the I am presence. I'm aware that it is not about good and evil, but is this the Christian attempt to get us to become more and more self-aware? Also, I know it is not about good and evil, but it's a simple way to get people to question their actions. Well, yeah, very interesting topic, conscience. So I think we need to recognize here, first of all, that religion in general, including the Christian religion, is not created for the purpose we were told as we were growing up. I was given the impression, I don't know specifically where it came from, but this was the impression I had, that religion was supposed to help us basically get into heaven and get on good terms with God. So it was about the spiritual realm and not about anything here in the matter world. But that, of course, is not the case. Most religions, the bigger mainstream religions, are really, they're just simply mechanisms for social control, where a small power elite attempts to control the population, and they have realized that the most effective way to control the population is not through physical means, weapons, but through the minds. So you look at the Catholic Church. For over 1,000 years, it was one of the most effective mind control machines seen in history. People literally were so afraid of going to hell that they were willing to submit themselves not only to the church here on earth, but even to the kings and the noble class that were approved by the church, sanctioned by the church, the divine rights of kings and so forth. So people were literally slaves of the king and the noble class and the clergy. And you look at this, and this is just a matter of control, right? So definitely this whole idea of conscience is an expression of this desire to control people. So there's this concept that, well, it starts with other things. First of all, the idea that we are sinners. We are sinners by nature. We were created as sinners through original sin. So already there, we're created at a deficit. We have to be saved from it, because there's the carrot and the stick. If we are saved and go to heaven, it'll be wonderful ever after. If we are not saved, we end up in hell, where we'll suffer for all eternity. So this is the two opposite polarities. And what determines whether you go to heaven or hell? Well, you have to make certain choices. And there is a devil who wants you to go to hell, who is wanting to deceive you and telling you to do bad things that will keep you out of heaven. But then there's an angel that's sitting on the other shoulder that's trying to get you to do the right thing. But what is the right thing? Well, it's defined by the church. And it is obedience to the church, obedience to your leaders. It's obedience to all these outer things here on earth. In other words, by fulfilling conditions on earth, you will qualify to go to heaven. Now, when I got a little older and started thinking about that, that just did not compute with me. How can fulfilling conditions here on earth, how can obeying an outer earthly organization qualify me to go to heaven? I always knew there had to be more to it, namely my state of consciousness is what determines. So anyway, so this is to me the background for the whole idea, where you are constantly looking at yourself and evaluating, will this get me to heaven or send me to hell? And this is a mechanism in the psychology that is what I, in many of my videos, have called a subconscious self, a separate self, because it's based on the consciousness of duality and separation. The whole idea of a God who is opposed by a devil, a heaven that's opposed by a hell, is dualistic. It's simply dualistic. So this is a classical, as I've talked about in several videos, a classical example of how the fallen beings do. They define a problem, and then they define the solution to the problem, which is you follow them, you obey them blindly. Follow the clergy, the kings. And so then the person says, is that same conscience, the voice in our head, that questions we are doing the right thing or not, part of the non-duality mindset? And is it linked to the I am presence? Well, see, here is a much more subtle thing. Because you can say, is there a voice in your head that wants you to do the right thing? Well, yes. But is that the same as the conscience that talks about heaven and hell? No. So we can say that, as I've explained in many videos, we have gone into a state of seeing ourselves as separate beings, which means we've lost contact with our I am presence, the higher self. We lost contact with our spiritual teachers, the ascended masters. Therefore, we become subject to the false teachers, which are the ones who created the whole dualistic mindset. As I said, they create the problem and then they present themselves as a solution. So you have that false conscience, you might say, that's trying to get you to do the right thing based on a worldly definition of what the right thing is. Then you have a valid voice in your head, you might say, that's trying to help you make choices that take you out of the duality consciousness, brings you back into connectedness. And in the beginning, on the spiritual path, it can be difficult to tell the difference. Which voice in your head are you listening to? I remember for years and years being confused by this. Because the conscience is built up over many lifetimes, it's very strong. But what I eventually learned, I learned to read the vibrational difference, but I learned to sense that the false conscience was more aggressive. It was more fear-based. It was more that, oh, if you don't do this, bad things will happen. Whereas the other one respected my free will and just, it didn't even really tell me what to do. It just either made a very gentle suggestion or it just showed me the difference in vibration, whether I did this or that. And so, what I'm trying to say is, the positive, the constructive, the higher aspect of conscience is that we have this connection to the spiritual realm. And the Ascended Masters talk about something called the Christ Self. And the Christ Self, it's an expression of what I've called the one mind or the Christ mind or the Buddha nature. In other words, as I also explained in my video about how the world was created, before God created anything, the Creator created anything, it created this one mind that cannot be divided. And the reason for this is that the Creator knew it was going to give us free will and that we could be lost in a state of separation. So in order to help us come back to oneness, connectedness, and oneness, it created everything out of the one mind. So that means wherever you go into separation, however deeply you go into illusion, there will be an aspect, an expression of the one mind that's with you that can be that higher conscience. And this is actually an I am presence, it's an ascended master that extends itself as your personal Christ self, whichever master is close to you. So, but the Christ self works within the free will. The false conscience, that is a separate self, doesn't respect your free will. But the Christ self does. So it will just either make a gentle suggestion or basically just show you the difference. And when you sharpen your intuition and learn to tune into this, I've said so many times where I've been in a situation, I've been thinking what to do, and there was that louder voice that told you, don't do this, it'll be wrong, or do this, it'll be good. But then there was that gentle, the small still voice within, as some call it, that just showed me this raises the energy, this lowers the energy. I've said before, you can learn to tune into your heart and sense anything, any situation you can sense. Is it lowering the energy in your heart, or is it lowering it or is it raising it? And then that is your guideline. That becomes your guideline, because you're always seeking to raise the energy. It doesn't matter so much about the outer things. But see, the trick is, in order to hear that small, still voice within that respects your free will, you have to look beyond that outer boisterous voice that is compelling you to do the right thing. In order to do that, you basically have to have some resolution of this separate self that is this larger voice, this louder voice. And you have to deal with the whole guilt complex that's put on us by religion. And that creates a whole conglomerate of these selves. But many spiritual people that I've met over the years, they have largely in past lives, they have overcome a lot of this guilt complex that religions instill in people. But I also met many religious people who haven't overcome that. They still are driven, their whole relationship to God is so driven by this sense of guilt and this fear of going to hell. Especially many fundamentalist Christians I met in the United States. So if you haven't overcome that fear of the outer voice, it's more difficult to listen to the small, still voice. And how do you overcome that? Well, you can do it if you find a valid spiritual teaching that talks about how you can have a different relationship with God. But for many people I know, it's something we overcame in past lives, and it was partly as a result of the emergence of science and rational mindset, where we became aware that there are so many things in religious doctrines don't make any sense, and they can't be right. And therefore we lost our faith in religion, and when we lost our faith in religion, the fear of doing the wrong thing wasn't as bad. It also relates to, of course, reincarnation, because you experience growing up in a Christian culture that are promising you hellfire and brimstone if you don't obey the church. And then it also promises you that if you do obey the church, you're going to go to heaven after this lifetime, because of course Christianity has for so long denied reincarnation. So here you are, you live a whole lifetime, you believe in what the church tells you. But now you die and you experience, oh, you didn't disappear, you're not going to heaven or hell, you're actually going into some state where you're preparing for your next lifetime. And then you come back into your next lifetime, and you don't remember this consciously, but you have a certain inner sense. There was something that isn't right about what Christianity is telling me. And when you've gone through that perhaps several lifetimes, you are born again with this sense, I don't believe this stuff they're telling me. I don't believe this stuff of heaven and hell. I don't believe I'm a sinner. And that then opens your mind to, let's put it this way, it diminishes the loudness of this boisterous false conscience, and it opens you to your higher self. And this can then lead to progress, and this can open you up to finding a spiritual teaching. So the person says, I'm aware that it's not about good and evil, but is this the Christian attempt to get us to become more and more self-aware? No. Not for mainstream Christianity. Mainstream Christianity, just look at it. Look at the Catholic Church, look at fundamentalist churches, look at Protestant churches. They don't want you to become self-aware. What are they always saying? Have faith. Believe. Believe in what you're being told. Believe in the doctrines. Believe that Jesus will save you. Well, that's not self-awareness. Hallelujah. That's just continuing to blindly follow the outer religion. As Jesus said, if the blind lead the blind, they shall both end up in the ditch. The ditch of having to reincarnate. So anyway, got carried away there. Also, I know it's not about good and evil, but it's a simple way to get people to question their actions. No, not really. Yeah, maybe question their actions. And you can say, if you have this traditional view of conscience that, should I do this or should I do that? Yeah, maybe you're questioning your actions. But how is that going to help you transform your consciousness? What you really need is question your motives, your psychology. Why are you doing certain things? Why do you want to do certain things? And is this actually subconscious selves that are causing you to have these desires, and they are just keeping you tied in this treadmill of unfulfillable desires? And when you question that, you can grow. Then you become self-aware. Because, see, this is actually an interesting point. Looking at your actions and you evaluating them based on this Christian definition of right and wrong, sinful and not sinful, that's not self-awareness. That's being self-conscious, whether you're doing the right thing or the wrong thing. Self-awareness is looking at your psychology and saying, oh, why do I have this reactionary pattern? Why am I always so afraid to do the wrong thing? Could this come from a subconscious self in my psychology? And would I feel more free and at peace if I resolved it? That is self-awareness, where you become more free of these subconscious patterns, these subconscious selves. So to me, that's self-awareness. It raises your sense of self beyond being a sinner, because when you believe that it's just a matter of avoiding sin and then you go to heaven, that's just not self-aware, because you are not a sinner. You are a self-aware being with free will. And the only way to go to heaven, so to speak, is to raise your sense of self beyond these dualistic selves. And that is true self-awareness, knowing who you are, knowing you are the conscious you, which is pure awareness, but ultimately you are your higher self, you are in presence. And to me, that's self-awareness. And that is not the goal of any Christian church that I've come across. There may be some New Age, mystical Christian churches that have that goal, but the mainstream churches certainly don't. They don't want you to be self-aware. They want you to be so afraid of looking at yourself that you blindly follow the outer church.